first BBC Charter, almost composed by accident. It's really important. It's based on 3 aversions. They don't want the BBC to be bureaucratically controlled. They don't want it to be subject to shareholders' profit. They don't want politicians to intervene, but they don't know how much of so far. And they positively want it to be allowed to grow in the national interest in that moment. The second BBC Charter deals with the BBC, which is completely different in size and scale. It's come from a little thing that people weren't that bothered about to a really large thing that is ubiquitous in the nation. The most important things in that period, 1933 to 1937, are in fact completely outside the Charter. That is the preparation of the BBC and the arguments about the nature of the BBC's relationship to government in the event of what looks like an increasingly likely war. These are technical, political, and sociological. So those arguments about whether the BBC can take news, whether it will take dissent in the time of war, in a wonderful paper by Clement Attlee, who argues for dissent, those arguments are going on behind the veil of appeasement. They're really important for the future of the BBC. They don't appear in the Charter, but they're going on. By 1947, the BBC as we know it, ethically, politically, as part of the nation, as a representation both at home and abroad, is a completely different beast from what it had been in 1937, but the Charter wording looks quite similar. By 1952, same words, completely different context, because the thing that happens between 1947 and 1952 is the emergence of commercial broadcasting. So the meaning of the Charter becomes different. By 1964, another significant Charter, Harold Wilson, a Prime Minister with a radical government and with real suspicions of the BBC, takes the BBC, which has now become a large part of, as it were, the nation's cultural and political infrastructure, and takes it out of the post office and puts it into the Home Office with the intention of keeping an eye on it. And this has an unintended consequence, which is that big beasts in the political jungle, Home Secretaries, are responsible for the BBC, and they defend it in Cabinet in an interestingly different way. And you can see a shift in Cabinet discussions of the BBC from that. Again, you can see how important the Charter is. So it is like a jewel in the crown, because William Whitelaw entirely consciously, entirely deliberately, gives the BBC a 15-year charter which puts it beyond Mrs. Thatcher's possible political career, in order to, in some sense, put the essence of the BBC. It's like the ring in the Lord of the Rings. He wants to put that beyond her capacity to intervene in it. So that tells you it's important, but the actual wording isn't that important. It doesn't change. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say we're doing it for that. 1997, you begin to see a real shift in the way in which different governments want to intervene in the Charter, specify purposes for the BBC. That is, I think, the beginning of a long 20 years worrying erosion of political independence as governments both tried to interfere in the Charter, restructure the BBC, but more significantly, irrespective of the niceties of the process and the niceties of the Charter, in fact, as we saw in 2010 and 2015, actually going for what can only be called muggings over the licence fee. So it's a 20-year worrying development. And that's why it's very important that people really do argue about the constitutional proprieties, the governance of the BBC, the nature of the Charter, what the Charter means, and particularly the length of time of the Charter. Not because the words within it somehow guarantee some of the proprieties one's concerned about, or some of the liberating possibilities one's concerned about, but because if you don't have that argument, then somebody else will walk away with that jewel out of the crown.